Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Leading Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. Listen, folks, today I have a very special guest. This is an individual who I've always wanted to interview. 5 years of podcasting. We're 400, almost 400 episodes at the time of this recording, and this is finally happening. I'm so excited to bring on Dr. Beverly Tatum. So without further ado, Dr. Beverly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be in conversation with you, Sheldon.
Again, the pleasure is mine. I got your book right here. I had to bring it out, and it's this is an amazing book. So your first book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria and Other Conversations About Race? Folks, grab your copy of this one, and also make sure you grab your copy of your book that's coming out tomorrow. I don't want to spill the beans, so I want to let you go ahead and jump into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Great. Well, I am a psychologist by training. And as many of your listeners may know, I have been writing about unlearning racism and racial identity in schools. And that, of course, is what my book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria and Other Conversations About Race, is about. But I've spent a large part of my career as a professor of psychology and then as president of Spelman College. I had the privilege of serving as the 9th president of Spelman for 13 years. And then I retired and spent a lot of my time out in the world speaking about the book you were just holding up. But I'm very excited to say that I have a new book coming out tomorrow. The title of it is Peril and Promise, College Leadership in Turbulent Times. And it really is drawing on my 40 plus years of experience in higher education to help educators, parents, anyone interested in higher education to understand how it works, how it benefits their young people, and what we need to do to protect this vital part of the American cultural experience and economy.
Thank you. And why don't you hold it up just so folks, because you got your copy. I don't have my copy yet.
Yes, here it is. I'm very excited about it. Peril and Promise.
Well, congratulations on that. And I'm curious, what was the motivation behind? Because I know you mentioned that this is just kind of let more information. But I want to know, what was the motivation? What kind of brought you to write that book?
Sure. Well, when I retired from Spelman College in 2015, now 10 years ago, I wanted to do two things. I wanted to update my book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together? It was originally published in 1997. So fast forward 20 years later, I redid it to bring it into the 21st century. And I'm really grateful that so many people found that to be a helpful revision, and really am glad that people like you and others have found it useful. But I also wanted to write a book about my experience as a college president. I wanted to reflect on the lessons learned in a leadership role and to share that with other people who might be interested in entering leadership roles in higher education. But, and this is a big but I spent a year, 2022 to 2023, as president of Mount Holyoke College, serving there as an interim president for 1 year. And when I finished that, I realized that my original idea about writing a book about higher education leadership would be interesting, but there were really other questions, other pressing questions that I really wanted people to understand. There have been a lot of attacks on higher education in recent months, and really over time, polls have shown that the American public has less confidence in higher education than it once did. And yet we know that getting an advanced education is probably the best way to improve your economic outcomes, to be upwardly mobile, to benefit your life in the long run, both in terms of health outcomes, career outcomes, personal happiness. There's so many benefits that come from advanced education. And I wanted my readers to understand how colleges work, how colleges can benefit them, and also the challenges that are facing higher education leaders today and why they're making the decisions they make. And as I was thinking about that, of course, the war between Israel and Hamas broke out. Campus protests were happening. Colleges were in the news a lot. And I thought, many people are wondering, why don't those presidents do this? Why don't those presidents do that? Why doesn't that leader make that decision? And I really wanted people to understand how it works and why people do the things they do.
Okay. Well, here we are. Got a lot of listeners that are K-12. We're preparing our students for future generations in college. And there's kind of like what you touched on earlier. It's like there's a lot of folks that like there was, I would say maybe a few years ago, we were like, college, everybody needs to go to college, but then all the debt starts to come up. And then like the idea of affordability and gainful employment were some challenges out there. And so now there's conversations like, well, maybe they don't need to go to college. Maybe they need to try this, go this, a different route.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to see, you've seen it as a college president, university president. And so why would you advocate for, maybe we need to revisit that conversation?
Well, one of the things that's really important for K through 12 educators to understand is that not all colleges are the same.
Okay.
Right? When we talk about higher education, we can talk about public institutions funded by the state. We can talk about private institutions, which are largely funded through private gifts and fundraising and tuition payments. But we can talk about for-profit institutions. Those are higher ed institutions that are essentially run to earn money for the investors versus not-for-profit institutions. And where a student chooses to start their career, start their education, will make a difference in terms of whether they're likely to finish. There's community college, 2 years versus 4 years. There are all these choices. And if you're a first generation college student, if your parents haven't attended and you are not getting access to good advice in your high school, maybe there aren't very many college counselors, you might make a choice that really is going to put you deep in debt and probably not lead to a positive outcome. For example, for-profit higher ed institutions, sometimes referred to as career colleges, often have very low completion rates. They cost a lot. You can get Pell Grants or federal financial aid and use it there. But if you don't graduate and if you have to take on debt to pay for it, you haven't benefited from it. And often the degrees that are being granted are not viewed as very valuable in the marketplace. If that's your only choice, that choice might not be a good one for you. Yeah. But you could go to a community college that's not very expensive and that gives you access to 2 years of education, which might then lead to a 4-year degree, being able to transfer to a larger or a 4-year institution and do that at relatively little cost with relatively little debt, and that might really benefit you. But what often happens is that people choose the institution that's closest to them. So if you live in an urban area and there's a career college in your neighborhood advertising, saying, come here, we can help you, you might say, well, that's what I should do. But in fact, that might be the very worst possible choice for you. So having an understanding of what the options are and what the success rates are is really important. I used to tell parents when I met them, when they came to visit Spelman College, for example, they'd say, well, we want our daughter's interested in science. She's interested in becoming an engineer. Why should she go here versus some other school that's offering an engineering program? And I used to say, well, one of the things you should ask at that other school is how many of the young Black women who start in that program actually finish in that program. If the answer is not very many, you might want to rethink whether that's the right choice for your child. If your daughter comes here, where we have a very high success rate of sending young women onto engineering programs or to medical school, where they're not going to be pushed out of programs because someone thinks they don't look like engineering talent or they don't look like medical school talent. If she's not able to achieve the goals that she wants to achieve at the institutions you're considering, then it's not going to be a good investment. Look at what's the right fit for the person and how do you make that kind of choice. Some of those questions are questions that I try to answer in my book from the perspective of a college leader.
So if this is good, I'm just thinking, like, kind of like what you mentioned, like as a college leader, you're going to be biased towards your university. You're going to say your university is the best university, right? You're not going to say, well, maybe you should go to the other school, right? So if I'm a parent or if I'm a someone that's trying to educate a young person that's wanting to go to college, what are some advice that you can give to those individuals that say, okay, just keep that in mind? Like whoever you talk to, they're going to be dedicated or alum or whatever it is. There's going to be some sort of a bias towards their institution. Is that something that we should factor in, or what are your thoughts?
Well, let me just say, as the college president, speaking, from that point of view, if
Mm-hmm.
I'm speaking as the college president, of course, I'm going to say positive things about my institution, right? That I'm the chief cheerleader for that institution. But the data speaks for itself.
Absolutely.
So if my wonderful institution has a graduation rate of, I'm making this number up, 20%, if only 20% of the students who start here graduate, that data is publicly available. It can be seen if you look up the institution on, US News, and will report the college rankings. The completion rates are there. One of the things that I used to say when I was president of Spelman is that we have one of the highest completion rates in the country for young Black women. That is a fact. Now, it can be fact checked, right? And so, but, if I say it's the most beautiful campus, well, maybe that's an opinion,
That's
right?
subjective, yeah.
Maybe that's an opinion. If I tell you that, we send more young Black women on to earn PhDs in the sciences than any other institution, as documented by the National Science Foundation. And I can say to parents, if your daughter or your student is interested in, when I was a parent sending my child to college, one of my children was very interested in studying physics. And we visited a school where I wanted to know how many young Black men have been successful in your physics department. How many young Black men are there studying physics at this school? And the person I asked couldn't really provide an answer. The answer was not very many.
Right.
The school that he ultimately chose to attend was a school where the president could say, we educate more young Black men in the STEM fields than almost any other institution. And that was a fact. And that's where my son eventually decided to go.
I love this. So I have another question. Obviously, we need to ask specific questions, especially with the identities and what our household, cultural backgrounds, those kind of things are very important.
Yes.
How much weight would you put on the academic or successful side of things versus the social thing? So, for example, if you say, "Hey, we're the number one school that graduates Black males in this field," but then what is their college experience like as on the social side of things? So maybe they're doing well on the academics pieces, but the social interactions aren't as good. Are those some questions that we should also ask? Like, what
Of
is your
course,
take on
of
that?
course. It's important. It's important to think of students as whole people. And so we understand that the college years are years where you're developing, not just academically, but you're also developing socially. You're making friends that may be your lifelong friends. You're connecting with people who might become your lifelong partner. All of this is important. And we want, however, what is really critical is to have a sense of belonging. Because one of the things we know is that persistence, when times get tough, if you don't feel like you belong someplace, you are likely to say, I'm out of here. I don't want to be here. This place is not for me. Maybe I'm not college material. Maybe you just give up. And you don't want to give up. You want to persist and achieve your goal of earning that degree. So, where will I feel like I belong? Where will I have a positive sense of belonging? That is part of the selection process too. But you don't want to belong and have so much fun that you are not achieving your academic goals. So, as a friend of mine used to say, you don't want to major in the minors. And we also know that a lot of students are not just college students, they're working part-time to help pay, maybe even full-time to help pay for their college education. They may have family responsibilities. They may have very tight schedules. You want to be a place where whatever your needs are, those needs are being supported by the institution so that you can achieve your goal.
I love it. how much weight would you put on? Would you look at it 50-50, social and academics? Like where would you be at as far as how much weight or emphasis you should be on the belonging side as well?
I think it's really important. And the reason I say I think it's really important is because it's difficult to do your best if you feel invisible. In my book, I talk about what I call the ABCs: affirming identity, building community, and cultivating leadership. That as an institutional leader, it was my job to be sure that we were affirming the identities of all of our students so that they felt as though they were part of our community. Nobody felt left out. B, building community. We know that when we feel a part of a community, we are feeling more invested in it. And by that, I'm talking not just about the students, but I'm talking about the employees, the faculty, the staff, the administrators. You want everybody to have a shared sense of responsibility for the success of the organization. And you do that by building a strong sense of community. And then C, cultivating leadership, has to do with the fact that we want to develop the leadership capacity of our students. We live in a very diverse world, not just in the United States, but think locally, act locally, think globally. We want people to understand, and by people, I mean the students we're educating. We want our students to understand that they are part of a global community. And in order to be successful in an increasingly global world, they need to be able to engage with people whose ways of being may be different from their own, whose life view may be different from their own, whose worldview may be different from their own, but yet they can still connect and navigate. So, in response to your question about academic or social, it's in some ways it's an artificial dichotomy, because if you feel affirmed, you're going to want to participate. If you feel seen, when I talk about affirmation, what I'm really talking about is that sense of feeling seen by others, heard by other people, your voice is acknowledged and is considered important and understood. People may not always agree with you, but they're listening to you. And that affirmation leads you to do your best work because you feel like I'm valued here. Let me lean in and show what I can do and be a contributing member of this community that's being built around me, and develop my capacity to engage with people whose points of view might be different from my own. If I'm able to do that, that's important socially, but it's also going to translate into academic success.
Okay, I like that. So they connect either way. You shouldn't put more weight on the other. On it. They both play a very pivotal role in a student's success, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, but I want to say this. Sometimes, and I've seen this happen. I have the privilege, as I said, of serving at Spelman for 13 years. But prior to that, I worked in predominantly, and Spelman, as your audience I'm sure will know, is a historically Black college for women. Prior to my experience at Spelman, I worked at predominantly white higher education institutions. And one of the things I observed in those PWIs is that Black students sometimes, because they were in the minority, felt they had to represent their group. They had to organize Black History Month activities. They had to be there on this committee or that committee to make sure that the Black point of view, their point of view, not that they were speaking for everyone, but that there were multiple and diverse perspectives included on the campus. And sometimes you would see students investing so much time and energy into that kind of community engagement that their academic performance suffered because they were spending so much time trying to do the other things. And it became kind of what some people call like the Black tax, the extra burden that fell on the shoulders of students of color, because the institution would say, we want you to be involved, we want you to be participating, but if there's a small number, the participation burden is not evenly distributed. And it takes up a lot of time and energy. And when I was a dean, before I was a college president, I was a dean. When I was a dean, I used to sometimes have to have conversations with students about the fact that, that event you're organizing, yes, it's an important event, but that midterm you've got coming up is also important. You need to balance. And if you have to spend less time on this, it's okay. Because if you don't do well, if you have to go home because your grades have suffered, someone else will take your spot, but that's not going to benefit you. So that kind of guidance is important. But it is, and even as I say this, I know that there are teachers, K through 12 teachers, who will have had similar experience. If you're one of a handful of Black teachers in a school, for example, you might feel like you have to be on every committee. But if you are on every committee and also doing your best to prepare for your lesson plans for your class and get the grades in on time and all of that, you're working really, really hard and are setting yourself up for potential burnout. So there is a need to kind of maintain a sense of balance between both the social activities and the academic events. But some of that comes with maturity too. And that's why advising and guidance from your faculty mentors or your dean's office advisor is so important. And to have those resources in place in a higher ed institution is so important for students to really be able to make the right choices.
All right, I like that. Yeah, I've been there, and I know a lot of my colleagues, like you said, the tax. It's that if I don't do it, who will? Who's going to do it? Those who have to translate and those who have to speak other languages, and you get certain kids always sent to you because you're the one that's expected to be able to handle them and how to build the relationships because other staff members can't do it. But then again, you still got a lesson plan, you still got to teach your lessons, things you aren't being compensated for. So I'm glad you brought that up. Let me ask you this, because you kind of touched on the retention side, and we might circle back to the retention side in the higher ed, but on the admission side of things.
Yes.
What are your thoughts as a former president? What are some things that admissions should be mindful of or just be attention to? I can say this as a person who has spent a lot of time in predominantly white institutions doing college tours and things like that. And one of the things that always irked me was the brochures and how like diverse the brochures would look with all these students of color and all these things. But when you go on the campus, like your campus looks nothing like these flyers that I see that you're producing. Like I was always pulled in to be on somebody's picture because I would be that one person. I'm like, I don't even go here. So what are your thoughts on admissions? Maybe some strategies, tips you can give in that area?
Well, this is why if you have the opportunity to do the campus tour, it's really important. I know that it's not always possible. And many institutions, particularly like during COVID, people couldn't necessarily go visit the campus. And many institutions have invested in the virtual tours that you can see on the websites, et cetera. But when you're on the campus, you have the opportunity to kind of take the tour guide aside and say, what's it really like here? In my experience, parents do that. They sort of pull your coat and want to whisper in your ear and say, well, tell me about the real deal over here. But when students have a chance to talk to fellow students, a rising high school senior can talk to a first year or a sophomore who's at the institution they're considering and hear firsthand about the experience. What is it really like on the campus? Have you been involved in athletics? What, organizations are available that I might participate in? There's nothing that replaces that. But at the same time, I know that that's not possible for every family. It's expensive to visit those colleges. Sometimes there are people taking group tours, bringing students, but not every student is going to have that opportunity. But to the extent that you can ask questions about the things that are most important to you. One thing that is really important to understand, and I write about this in my book, with the big affirmative action case, that was decided, essentially ending affirmative action in higher education. Many people thought, well, that means no more opportunities for kids of color. But that's not at all the case. What is important to say is that though that affirmative action case, while important, is mostly relevant to the most highly selective institutions, the Stanfords, the Harvards, that are only taking like 5% or less of the applicants. Most colleges and universities today accept a very high percentage, more than half of the students who apply will be admitted. So there is an opportunity for a student to find a college that matches their interest, that is perhaps close to their home, where they will be admitted. The question will then be, can I afford it? What will it cost? What's the financial aid available to me? We hear these stories that make it seem as though it's impossible unless you're just in the very top 1% of your class to get into the college of your choice or to get a scholarship for support. And that's just not true. There are lots of institutions that are eagerly looking to bring in talented students and who have resources to provide financial aid for them.
I like what you said about the pulling the folks to the side and saying, "Hey, what is it really like here? Don't give me the show, right? Like I want to know just between you and I,
Yeah.
what is it? What is it really like? Okay, I like that. That's something I didn't think about asking. Okay, so let's circle back to the retention side. So now that we have students that are at the school, at the institution of higher education, now that we have them, how do we keep them, especially those who are historically been marginalized, maybe not a high representation of their population identities? What are some strategies that you can provide in that area?
One of the things that and there's some examples about this in my book, that some institutions are doing very successfully is what is sometimes referred to as intrusive advising. And what do we mean by intrusive advising? That means really paying close attention to what choices students are making. If you're a first generation college student, you might not know or really understand how the system of adding classes and dropping classes works. Let's imagine you are in your first semester and you're struggling with one of your classes. Maybe it's a chemistry class, and you've had some trouble on the quizzes. The question is, have you been to the office hours? Have you been to talk to the professor? Have you been to the tutoring center? Have you accessed the academic supports that are often quite readily available? Sometimes students don't take advantage of the resources that are there because maybe there's a sense of embarrassment, or they feel like, I'm not doing well because I'm just not smart enough. That's what they're telling themselves. But in fact, what they don't know is that lots of people didn't do well on that first exam. Lots of people aren't confident about their ability to be successful. But some of those people are taking advantage of the resources that are available. In some institutions, I'm going to use as an example Georgia State University. I live in Atlanta. Georgia State is here in Atlanta, and it has become known for its ability to provide just-in-time interventions to help students. So if, for example, that student did very poorly on the first exam, not only does that student get that feedback in terms of the score, but there's an academic advisor who is also being notified that this student is struggling. So they don't have to wait for the student to show up. They can reach out to the student and say, I see that you're having some trouble. Let's talk about that. Let's see what resources we can provide. Or maybe there's a student who has been coming to class, but all of a sudden has stopped attending. And we don't know why the student has stopped attending. But the professor can flag, Beverly hasn't been to the last 5 classes. And maybe the advisor reaches out and finds out that, oh, Beverly's a commuter student. Her car was totaled in an accident. She doesn't have transportation. That may or may not be a problem that the institution may not be able to fix her car, but it might be that the institution can provide her a MARTR card so she can at least use public transportation to get back on track and attend while she's waiting for her car to be fixed. Maybe she knew she could do it on MARTA, but she didn't have any MARTA money. So a small investment on the part of that office, that what I'm calling that just-in-time intervention, can keep her on track. That kind of really, we're here to help you be successful, give you what you need just in time approach has been shown to be very, very effective in keeping kids in school and helping those first-gen students graduate at the same rate as other students.
Oh man, this is good. This is gold right here. So folks, again, make sure you grab yourself a copy. Links in the show notes. Book is out tomorrow. I have another question in regards to maybe pipelines. I'm assuming some of your school, like maybe Spelman, for example, had connections with some of the local high schools, and maybe there's some dual enrollment or some sort of pipeline programs. What are your thoughts on that? How successful do you see those type of programs being with a transition to post-secondary from high school situation?
Well, that those kinds of programs can be very helpful, both in terms of exposing students to what it would be like to be in college. If you have that kind of high school summer experience, for example, summer enrichment experience. One of the things we know under this current administration is that some of those programs are being cut, right? Yeah. Funding for some of those pre-college programs at the federal level are being wound down. But there are institutions that provide privately those kinds of opportunities as their strategy for recruiting students. You know, if I get a student who visits the campus as a high school student in the summer, falls in love with it, wants to be there, that student's going to apply when she's a senior and hopefully will be admitted and come to Spelman or some other institution. You know, so there are lots of programs like that have proven to be effective recruitment tools, but also helpful to students who are getting their sea legs in terms of figuring out what makes the college experience a successful one for them.
Yeah. Shout out to TRIO, Educational Talent Search, Upper Bound, Student Support Services, McNair Scholars, all of those programs. I worked with Educational Talent Search, and I know there's a lot going on in regards to funding from the federal government. So it sounded like you were alluding to some of those programs.
Yes. Yeah.
So listen, I will say this. I was debating how I wanted to address you. We talked before we hit record. I just don't feel right calling you Beverly. It just doesn't feel right, just out of respect. So Dr. Tatum, I'll say I've learned a lot from this conversation, and I look forward to getting my copy of the book tomorrow. But I would love for you to share any last final words with our listeners out there.
What I really want readers of my book to know is that college matters. Maybe it's not for everyone, but it's for a lot of people, and it's accessible to a lot of people. Higher education in the United States has been a source of great positive progress, and if we don't support it and defend it, we will lose that advantage, and that would be a shame.
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, I'm talking to Dr. Beverly Tatum, author of Peril and Promise, College Leadership in Turbulent Times, out tomorrow. Dr. Tatum, it has truly been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
It's been my honor. Thank you so much.
Oh, by the way, I forgot. If we have some folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
I have a website, beverlydanieltatum.com.
All right, there it is. Thank you again.
My pleasure.